Well, we're here with someone I'm proud to call my friend, Dr. Joan Pastor. And I was looking back at when we first met, and it was, I think, 9 years ago. Um, Joan is a corporate and clinical psychologist, and she's the author of a book called Success as an Introvert for Dummies. Before we get into your book, could you talk about the range of your professional work today so we have a context for the book itself?
Yes. I do want to make one clarification, and that is the name of the book is Success as an Introvert, and it's a part of the Dummies series
Correct,
that's
thank you.
put out by Wiley. So I don't want people to think that, oh God, I must be dumb, if I buy this. So, but I think just about everybody out there knows what the Dummies series is. Just think of the yellow and the black books that you see everywhere. Okay. I'm sorry, so now ask me that question again, please.
Just kind of give us an idea of the range of your professional work so we have a context for this book.
Okay. Well, the range of my professional work actually is important to understand this book and to understand why Wiley, publishers asked me to write it. As you said, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, which, for most people, they think of television and you're on the couch, laying there, sitting in a chair and talking about your personal problems, and there to solve personal problems or family problems, whatever. I am trained in that. I'm also trained, though, as an industrial organizational psychologist, which is all to do with the business world. So going into organizations and working with people there to grow the company, to grow the organization, to achieve their strategic goals, and to also make sure that the people in these organizations, that they're a good fit, that you've got the right people in the right job and the right type of organizational culture, because it's not a right or wrong thing. There's no judgment. It's just that it's important for people to know what brings them joy and where they can be most productive and most successful. And it's important for an organization to have people in there that support, what they're doing and can support the culture and, and feel a part of it. So what happened is that a number of books came out recently on introverts, the power of being an introvert and all the good stuff about that. And me being a former introvert, and now I would call myself an ambivert. So, and if you get the book, I do tell my story in there. It's not pretty. I want you to know. If you are an introvert, you can understand that I did make the decision. I had to as a businesswoman back then. There was no social media. There was no internet. So how was I going to build a business and, get business in if I didn't get myself out there in front of people, in front of groups? And believe me, public speaking was the last thing that I ever wanted to do. In fact, I fainted a number of times in the beginning. And I have some old videotapes somewhere when I first started out. You could definitely blackmail me with that videotape if you ever got a hold of it. So in my work, what I found is that it's really important to understand that, and I found this in my dissertation, it came out there too, unexpectedly, that the type of person in terms of just, where they are temperamentally, which includes introvert versus extrovert, makes a difference in the career selection. It makes a difference in how you go about, fulfilling your career, developing it and fulfilling it. I talked about that back then I kind of had to change myself because I did want my own business, and I knew that that's what it took. If the internet had been out back then, honestly, I probably would have done, even now I'm pretty darn good social media expert, for a non-techie. But that's because I know how important it is, you see, and there's a part of me intrigued with that. But back then, I had to become an extrovert. So this book really covers both areas. It covers success in your personal life and in your private world and in your family and in dating and in relationships. And it also covers being successful in your career, in organizations, and the challenges that introverts go through, to develop themselves and have the kind of life and contribute in a way that they feel best they can, but also the strengths that they bring. And there's a lot of strengths that introverts bring. And the same thing's true for an extrovert. There's no right or wrong here. One is not better than the other.
I think one thing I appreciate about your book and your approach is that I would say, like, until recently, there were lots of self-help books being written, and they might be written for introverts, but they would be how to become an extrovert instead of how can we draw on the natural strengths that an introverted person has. I think that's what you've done. Is that correct?
Absolutely, but I've done more than that. You're bringing up a very important issue, and it's a kind of a bone of contention for me. There's books that have been written out there on how an introvert should become an extrovert. But there's also books that have been written out there about how introverts are God's gift to mankind and are much better than extroverts, and why they should rule the world, which may or may not be true. I mean, really, okay? And I made it very, very clear. I make it very clear in the book, and I come back to this point repeatedly, and that is that I am not there to tell you what you should do. My job in the book is to lay out a framework, okay, of, just really that, it's really up to you, just how much you feel that you need to grow or change certain parts of yourself, in what way you should do that, whether to do it all by yourself or to, engage the help of somebody, like a therapist or whatever. It's up to you. I mean, plus, people really vary widely on how introverted they are. People vary widely on how extroverted they are. And, it's also going to be a matter of truly what your comfort is and what you want. It's going to go back to your ultimate vision, where you think you can most make a difference in the world and how you can do that. You, for example, Kevin, your passion is writing. You are a writer. Am I correct?
Yeah.
First and foremost, Well, writing, for the most part, for a person to be a successful writer, they're going to have to lock themselves up in a room, and they're going to have to spend a lot of time alone in front of that computer, or however they do their writing process. But, so I would think that most people who are passionate writers are going to have at least some degree of introverted qualities in them. The same in professions where you spend a lot of time either in front of a computer alone, or you spend a lot of time. In fact, I know it because I can't tell you how many more introverted people in IT, when I work with IT in corporations, I can always tell how introverted the group is, as a whole. Because if I walk in and the lights are off, or they're dimmed, then I know, okay, we've got a number of introverts in the room. Because extroverted people are always going to need light.
Yeah.
They're going to need that as a counterbalance to staring at the screen all day, I always laugh. And I've been in organizations where you go to the marketing function, the sales function, other function, customer service, the lights are bright, they're glaring, the windows are open, whatever. Then you go over to IT, or you go to engineering, or you go to research, whatever. The lights are dim, there's no windows, it's like, there's, and these are things that you learn over time, in terms of being able to tell what kind of group you have. And as long as people are setting goals that are contributing to the organization, or your own personal goals, and you're doing the things that are helping you to achieve them, then what you need to make it work for you, and so that you are fulfilled personally. And if you're working for an organization, for you and the organization, to be successful, that's a choice for you to make, the reader. That's not for me to tell you. So I'm really clear about that throughout the book. I'm really clear.
So, I met you as part of the Flash Forward Institute in Los Angeles, and that's a wonderful program for people that are in the entertainment industry, and it's there to help them to get to the next level by doing things that they haven't done before. And there's a problem for introverts because we are risk adverse, at the same time kind of get a thrill out of it as well. But
yes.
But okay, that idea that it's getting people to do things that they haven't imagined they could do, or at least have never done before. And I want to ask a question about how that applies to you. That is, did you plan out your career before you started it, or did you just respond as it unfolded? What are some risks you took that got you where you are today? And are you doing things that you never dreamed you would do?
Oh, gosh. Absolutely. Yes to all of that. Well, first we have to, in order to understand, for me to answer that, I need to actually make clear what an introvert actually is. Because there's so many misconceptions of what an introvert is versus an extrovert. So let me just say that very quickly, and the book goes to this in much more detail and really makes the distinctions for people. Bottom line, you are an introvert if where you gain your energy, your passion, what excites you are the ideas in your head, your brain. If you love going into your brain, and philosophizing about things or creating stories about people, or even as an actor, because you mentioned Flash Forward, there's a lot of actors who are actually quite introverted, they like to get lost in this character. They create this whole world. So you gain your energy, your inspiration, and a very introverted person could be very good at figuring things out completely in their head. Some people are very introverted, and actually they can get lost in all their thoughts and start philosophizing, and maybe need to actually write it out. And that's as opposed to an extrovert. An extrovert, which I've now taken on some of those traits, and I've experienced the shift, and it really is a shift. And that is, an extrovert does not gain energy by going into their brain. They do not gain energy by thinking things through and by analyzing. An extrovert gains their energy through contact with people and with the world. They gain energy by actually doing something, out there and getting immediate feedback. But most extroverts gain their energy through people contact. So now it took me a long time. I started out terrified of an audience. Even when I was a kid, I didn't really need a lot of people around me, But now, it's like when I go out there, it used to be I was almost like a performer, it's like I had it in my head and I would spout it out and stuff, and I would memorize. Oh my God, the prep I would do, introverts can understand that. We over prep and over analyze everything. But once, it took a long time. It took at least a decade. And then I was able to make the shift. So now when I go out there, I can feed off the energy in the room. And it's a very different kind of experience. But I can still go back and forth, So, but and that's something, that's what an ambivert eventually becomes. It's kind of like being, ambidextrous, So I was forced to have to use my left hand. Being a strong righty, I was forced to have to develop my left hand. It was not easy. Now, your question is, though, going back to your question, and that is did I plan my career out, right? The answer to that is no. However, as a true introvert at the time, I can't remember how old I was, but I became clear what I wanted to do the day it was Martin Luther King's assassination. And there's a long story there, but I'm not going to tell it. Just to bottom line it for you. And that is that when I found out that he was assassinated, I didn't really understand. I asked my parents, they explained what happened and about assassinations. And something in me, I just went right inside me. A lot of introverts can relate to this. And I just said, I want to understand what makes people tick. How do people come to decisions like that? How can they come to do such a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was my career. And I didn't know that it meant becoming a psychologist. In fact, I wasn't originally. I was going to be a philosopher. I really was. I was enrolled in a PhD program at Temple University where my master's was going to be in psychology. And then my PhD was going to be in Far Eastern philosophy and religious studies. And then I was going to go academia, teach, right? Write and teach. But as it just turned out, along the way, I did end up falling in love with psychology because being a nice introvert still at the time, a friend of mine introduced me to, who's introverted, and a very successful psychologist. She introduced me to Carl Jung's, field of psychology, and he marries the spiritual and the religious with psychology, and philosophy with psychology. And the way he does it was, for me, just opened it all up. So I ended up making a career shift, in terms of wanting to be more on that end. And because of that, honestly, if I had stayed in academia, I'd probably still be an introvert, I'd probably be hopefully you'd think over the years I still would have become a better speaker or teacher, So now
I think an interesting thing for aspiring writers would be, I think, the insight that you've just been talking about, and that is, you can disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but if you want to be a writer of fiction, it could be very helpful to study psychology, to have a deeper understanding about what motivates people, and including the truth that evil characters don't see themselves as evil, and good characters need to be more complex than just two-dimensionally good.
Oh, absolutely. And if you are interested, a field of study that I would recommend in psychology would be something called Gestalt. And I'll tell you why. Just recently, I watched the documentary on J.D. Salinger. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've happened to see that. It was on PBS, The American Masters.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, my gosh. If you're a writer out there, all you writers, you gotta see that. It's really phenomenal. And what is phenomenal about it is that there's times when he just locks himself up, for days in and days out, and just writes. So even after Catcher in the Rye, he still did a lot of writing, but it was all for himself. But they kind of allude to it, but I don't think the people who did the documentary understood what was going on. But in those, when he was lock himself up, he would actually get into his head and get into all the characters, and he would act them all out. He would literally role play them. I mean, he became his own little theater troupe, And that is something that Gestalt, when I work with actors and writers in Beverly Hills, mm-hmm. That's one thing that I teach them, along with a number of other things, is how to be able to really develop a character in your head so that they're not just two-dimensional, and there's ways to do that. So if you were to study psychology, there's a lot of things to study that I love, but I would say Gestalt might be an avenue that's especially useful. And the writers I've worked with, they seem to find that really helpful. It takes some time to catch it, to pick it up, but once you pick it up, it makes your writing it makes your writing much easier.
Thank you. And since we have a psychologist with us right now, could you talk about good old rejection?
Yes. Which, of course, to an introvert is like, oh, God. It's bad enough that, remember, it's like introverts don't get their energy, or at least they don't get most of their energy from other people, So it's like if an introvert had a way, a strong introvert, if they had a way to avoid contact with most people, they probably wouldn't mind, Now, again, remember, there's degrees of introversion.
Sure.
So there are some introverts out there that do need contact with people, but they tend to have a small circle, or very defined circles and groups that they will operate in. So given that, rejection is, you must understand, first of all, rejection is hard for all people, okay? Only the most extroverted of people that have the thickest skin on the planet. And some people are born with it. Most people have to develop it, to learn how to not take rejection personally and to expect it. Also, one of the things that's really hard for all people, but especially for introverts, especially if you guys are writers, and, this feels like your baby. You know what I mean? This is your work,
right.
Okay? So when they reject it, it feels like, it's a personal rejection of you. And to be able to get to a place instead where you can be open to feedback and actually gain a lot of feedback. And also, there's a process to learning how to handle rejection and to really become, I don't know if numb is the right word, but, in my work now, I'm working with large organizational changes, huge organizations, and they're the C teams, the chief executive officers, the chief financial, really at the top here. Let me tell you, do I go through periods where, when they bark and bite back and, oh my God, these people can be scary. So, because they're very results oriented and it's got to be done now and and so, it's really, rejection is something that you never, ever, ever, ever use to hold yourself back. And a really wonderful thing to think about, and he talks about it very openly, the best piece I can give you is Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Mm-hmm. He is a personal friend, so as is Mark Victor Hansen, the two authors, and I can't remember exactly how many publishing houses they submitted it to, but I want to say, I know it was over 100. I want to say that they had something like 110 or 117 rejections, and there was a lot of things that they learned along the way. Every time they were rejected, they got a lot of feedback. And then as time went on, they began to develop a process that increased the chances that somebody would bite. And somebody did. They took a chance on it. And they actually, the person, I can't remember, I think it was Insight Publishers, whoever it was, of course, they're very happy people now, those publishers, because they were a very small publishing house at the time. But they're not small anymore.
Right.
And they were very nervous about taking on Chicken Soup for the Soul, But Jack has a fabulous story that he tells about all that, which, be good to hear it from Jack. I would you can go to his website. I think he does talk about it some there. But, they went through a lot of rejection. I work with actors, and it's very disheartening, when they come in and they're in their 30s and 40s, and it's like, oh, I'm done, it's over. There's just no way. And I have to keep telling them, no, think of Wanda Sykes, there's a lot of people out there that didn't make it, didn't break through. There's a lot of people in business. I know somebody who struggled his whole career in business, in New Jersey, retired in his mid-60s, moved with his wife to Atlanta because, of course, it's much warmer there. So, and realized that what the business he was doing in New Jersey, there was way too many people. The competition was too much. He got to Atlanta, nobody was doing what he was doing, and it was a very practical, piece that had to do with construction, something for buildings, right? Mm-hmm. Well, This guy in his upper 60s is having the time of his life and making millions of dollars, you know? And because he was older and smarter, he also delegated a lot more this time around. So he didn't have to run around being exhausted all the time. So you never know. I have a lot to say about that. But sometimes the timing is just not right, but you still got to persist anyway. And you've got to learn. Every time there's a rejection, you got to know that there's a reason for it. There's something there that you need to learn. And it's like putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And as the pieces come together, you begin to develop strategies for, and that's something that sometimes the introverted person does struggle with, is that some introverts are too strategic. All they can see is the big picture, but they don't know how to bring it down into the practicalities. But I get other introverts that are very much like, the blinders are on, and all they can see is this much. And that was me, by the way. I was more like this, So they can only see this piece. And you keep getting hit over the head, either way, by life, until you either are forced to open up your blinders. Oh my God, oh no, I'm terrified. But courage is not having no fear. Courage is about doing things even when you're terrified to do it. The one thing I would suggest, though, and that is really important, through this whole process, because rejection is an important part for anybody who's going to be successful in their career. It's really important for people to know that. Every successful person, any person who said that they've never been rejected or never had to suffer that, to me, that's an accident waiting to happen. It will happen. Mm-hmm. They maybe were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and everything was given to them. It will happen, I promise you. For those of us who've been lucky enough to go through a lot of rejection earlier, if we can, what you do want to have is a good support system. That's what's key. You want to learn to develop internal support for yourself, how to strengthen your own internal support system to handle it and to grow from it and to become a master, not only as a writer, but a master at managing people's concerns and fears and rejections and objections and all that, right? And at the same time, you also want to truly have people around you that you can talk to, sometimes 5 times a day if you go through that many rejections, that you guys can lean on each other and say, oh my God, whoa, right? And,
right. Mm-hmm.
but that other person cannot just commiserate with you. They just can't go and vent with you and say, oh yeah, it's so horrible. No. No, this is where you need a support system that will understand, will acknowledge how difficult it is, because it is. And at the same time, we'll say, okay, and what are we going to learn from this? What can we do better? What needs to change? Do you see? So a true support system that really is geared towards helping each other achieve their goals. And I think that's really critical. I will tell you something that you guys might find fascinating. I always intended, I wouldn't say always, probably as even from a teenager, I always knew that I was going to write and publish. I always knew that. I always knew that my forte was more in the self-help industry, self-help arena. What I wasn't sure about, was how to make that happen. And in mid-career, I went back to school. You know this already, Kevin, I'm sure I've told you, but I did not go back to get my doctorate until I was 39 years old. When I went back at 39, at that time, I was much older than anybody else in my program. I was the age of the professors, not the other students. And talking about some interesting situations that brought up, let me tell you. Now it's much more common. We're seeing much bigger age, differentiation, but not when I went back. But one of the reasons why I went back, besides the fact that I really wanted to learn more about my field and I felt it was good career-wise, I knew having the proper credentials was also important for the kind of writing that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that has turned out to be true for me. If I'm going to be a self-help kind of author, whether it's going to be, for personal self-help or organizational, or a combination of both, okay, I need to have impeccable credentials. That's just what I needed. So for some writers out there, some of the things you need to consider too is there something you can do, that will also make you more desirable for your particular market, your particular genre. And there probably is. And, that's again where you want to brainstorm with a professional in your, area of expertise, or just someone who's good career development.
I think a corollary of that is something that came up in our last interview with Paul Conley, who's a mechanical engineer. And he's almost finished with a new book on taking the principles that major engineering companies like Boeing and Lockheed use to innovate, and applying that for small businesses, smaller engineering kind of businesses. So
Right.
How can a smaller company be innovative? But my point is something that aspiring writers may not think about, and that's write in your field. And if you write in your field, you can become an expert at something, or at least be considered to be an expert, and that is also another one of those credentials. So it may be, as you're saying, get a degree or something like that to raise your platform, or just spend half an hour a day writing.
Well, yeah. And in your field, that
In your field.
you're bringing up an extremely powerful point. And I would recommend becoming known as an expert really does seem to open a lot of doors. And that was that was something that was kind of clear to me. I knew that once I discovered psychology, right, and wasn't going to be a philosopher, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. Now, and that really helped a lot to really focus in. I'm going to tell you, in my field, getting those credentials as a psychologist was a necessity, because that's what caused others, both in the entertainment industry, in the corporate world, in the clinical world, to see me as an expert, was having those credentials. And then, of course, as my name gets out there, or people refer me or recommend me, then the expertise becomes also word of mouth. But I feel very strongly in what you're saying, that become known for one area that you're really, really extremely good at. You are the go-to person for that. And that will make a big difference. And then you really want to put that out there on your websites, on YouTubes. You really want to social media that one to death, So really get it out there, make it known to all your friends, get the word out. I am an expert in. Now, also, to develop your expertise more, I'd like to recommend a book. I get no referral fees for it. I don't even know the author, but I know that he talks about this in the book, and it's called The 4-Hour Work Week. I don't know if you all have heard of this book.
Yeah.
In there, he talks about the quick and dirty way to become an expert, in your field. So, he does give some very good tips. He really does. He spills some secrets in there.
Well, Joan, it's been great talking to you, and we've already gone over our time limit. And
yes.
I could ask you many more questions. Let me just end with this, that if things work out, there's going to be some introductory music to this interview and all the subsequent interviews. A friend of mine is a German classical pianist who also does jazzy kind of things. He's done a cover of a song you might remember from Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers from Swing Time, and it's the song Pick Yourself Up. And I think it's like great for what you've been saying and what we're trying to do, which is when you fall down, you just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again.
Well, yes and no. That's spoken like a true introvert, which you just said. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you have developed a really strong external support system, and you also that's going to hold you accountable and keep you going, and you also have worked on developing your own internal support system that says, darn it, I'm good at what I do, and the information I have to offer really will help other people, or really will give a lot of pleasure and joy to other people. It depends on what your focus is, right?
Yeah.
And we can always use more joy and fun and love and positive, pleasurable things, so to make life easier. And you know what? You grow a lot through humor and all those things. It doesn't, one of the biggest compliments I ever got from somebody who I worked with many years ago, she wrote a testimonial. She said, I never expected that when I went to Joan for therapy that I would end up laughing so much. And I really loved that, because there's a lot of ways to help in the world and to make a difference. And every person has their own unique gift and their own unique path, to making a contribution. Can I just do a little pitch here?
Yes.
And that is at the end, I and fabulous people in my office, we do a lot of excellent coaching on career, vocational coaching, career development, getting careers going, back on track, getting them off, and moving, getting them soaring, transforming, helping to do what exactly you need to do to get where you want to be. So as the old saying goes, whatever you're doing now has gotten you to where you are right now. And in order to get to where you want to be, whatever that vision is, if you don't have a vision, that's your first step. You need to get that clear. But if you have it, then it often requires a whole new skill set to get there. So, I pride myself on myself and my team being extremely good at doing that. We are one of 12 coaches that were chosen by the University of Michigan, to be the coaches for their people, for their graduates, for the whole world. This is in the whole world, for U of M, University of Michigan graduates. But of course, we work with people all over the world. So if people are interested, they can contact us. The best way would be probably, I'm just going to go and give you my email address. Is that okay? Or
I was going to say, I'll post links and all those things embedded in the video.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much.
And I can attest that I've worked with you and everything you're saying is true. Because as a consequence of working with you, I did things that I never could have done before. And once I did it, I was really glad I did it.
Yeah. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. There's an intelligence to that. Sometimes it's something is just too painful. If it's just too hard and too painful, you have to respect yourself. Mm-hmm. And you have to ask yourself, when is enough enough? As Kenny Rogers would say, when you got to know when to fold them, But and if you're not sure, sometimes you have to get help to decide that too. On the other hand, if you're only quaking in your boots, some of the time, and you've got a good support system, and you are clear about, the contribution you want to make. I go through periods in my career where, believe me, I'm quaking in the boots again. So but as long as I've learned, I need to have people around me to support me, and that I can use as reality checks to say, is it just me or da-da-da-da-da, And I'll leave a thought for you guys to consider. Psychologists, one of the things that's part of our ethics, this is true for psychologists across the United States, I would assume in Canada too. I can't speak for other countries. But if we get a case that's complex, or we feel are parts in it that are not really our area of expertise, but there's still reasons to keep the case, we are encouraged strongly to call up another psychologist. I mean, we don't even have to know the person, but if they have an area of expertise, we will call each other up and we will say, hey, can you give me 30 minutes or an hour, whatever? Can I get on your clock? And we do sometimes with psychiatrists. We actually have a few psychiatrists out there that are open-minded enough that even do it with other psychiatrists and psychologists. So, it's really important to know that there's going to definitely be times. That's a sign of your success when you feel like, oh my God, am I getting in over my head? Well, you've got a lot of options if you feel that's happening. If you feel you're not getting in over your head, then you're not pushing yourself enough. Okay? But only you can decide, if it's too much heat. And there's been some times in my life when I've said, it's too much heat. I'm getting out of the kitchen. I've made some really clear choices that way. And it was really hard at the time, but looking back, best thing I ever could have done.
Well, Joan, it's been great talking to you, and I know you need to get on with your evening.
I do.
And anyway, it's been a great time reminiscing with you and
yeah.
hearing your wisdom once again.
Oh, thank you so much.